My son-in-law was sitting in my recliner when I walked into my own living room. Not the couch, not one of the dining chairs, my recliner, the one I've had for 11 years, the one with the worn armrest where I rest my left elbow when I read at night. He was in it like he owned the place, one ankle crossed over his knee, remote in his hand, flipping through my cable channels. I stood in the doorway for a moment and just looked at him. "Oh, hey," he said, without looking up. That was it. No, "Hey, sorry, let me move." No acknowledgement that anything was out of place. Just, "Oh, hey," like I was the one who had walked into his home. I went to the kitchen to pour myself a cup of coffee and reminded myself to breathe. My daughter had met him 3 years earlier at some work event in Charlotte. She called me that first weekend and said, "Dad, I think this one's different." I believed her because she sounded different, steadier, less caught up in the excitement of it. They got married 8 months later in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside Asheville. I paid for most of it. I didn't mind at the time. She was happy and she looked beautiful, and I danced with her to the same song I danced with her to 20-some years before her mother passed. That night felt like something good. I want to be fair. In the beginning, he wasn't bad. He was a little loud, a little too impressed with himself, but that describes half the young men I've met in my life. He worked in sales, medical equipment, he said, though I could never quite pin down what exactly he sold or who exactly he sold it to. He talked about big commissions that were just around the corner and clients he was this close to closing. I'd spent 31 years as a forensic accountant before retiring. I know what a real number looks like, and I know what a story looks like dressed up as one. But I kept my mouth shut because my daughter loved him, and that mattered more than my suspicions. They had been living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Raleigh. Then the lease got expensive. Then his commission checks stopped arriving on schedule. Then my daughter called me one Sunday evening. She had that particular quiet in her voice that meant she was choosing her words carefully, and asked if they could stay with me for a little while, just until they got back on their feet. My house is a 4-bedroom colonial in Greensboro, North Carolina. I've lived here for 26 years. It's paid off. The yard is maintained. I have a study full of books I've actually read and a back porch where I drink my coffee every morning and watch the Cardinals come to the feeder I put up the year my wife died. It is my home. It is the only thing I have that still feels entirely like mine. I said yes because she was my daughter. They moved in on a Saturday in March. By the following Saturday, he had rearranged my living room furniture for better flow. I moved it back. He rearranged it again while I was at the grocery store. That was the week of the recliner. I told myself it was small things. Adjustments. They were guests, and guests take up space. I understood that. But there's a kind of person who mistakes your patience for permission. Every inch you give, they mark as territory. By May, it had stopped being about furniture. He started bringing up his parents in conversation. Casually at first. My mom mentioned she's having trouble with her landlord again. Or, my dad's knee has been giving him problems, and their place doesn't have good accessibility. His parents lived in Wilmington, about 2.5 hours south. I had met them twice. They were pleasant enough people, but they had that particular quality of people who had always depended on someone else to make decisions for them. Nice but soft, the kind of people their son had learned to speak for. One evening in June, the 3 of us were having dinner. Grilled chicken, corn on the cob, the kind of simple meal I make for myself on weekdays, and he set down his fork and said, "We should talk about something." I waited. "My parents need a stable situation," he said. "Their landlord's selling the building. They've got 60 days. "That's hard," I said. "It is." He nodded like I had agreed to something I hadn't agreed to yet, and this house has 2 extra bedrooms. I put down my own fork. My daughter was looking at her corn. "What are you suggesting?" I asked. I'm suggesting we use the space we have, he said. They're family. They're your family, I said. They're people I've met twice. His expression shifted. Not angry yet, but heading there. You have 4 bedrooms. You live alone. There's no reason you can't. I do live alone, I said. Or I did. My daughter finally looked up. Dad, just think about it. I told them I'd think about it. I didn't tell them what I was actually thinking, which was that this had been the plan all along. The visit wasn't a visit. It was a wedge. And now came the rest of the door. I'm not a man who panics. It's not in my nature, and it's not in my training. 31 years of forensic accounting means you learn to sit with uncomfortable information and think clearly about what it means. You don't react. You document. You build a picture. You understand the full shape of something before you decide what to do about it. So I made some calls. My oldest friend in the world is a man named Walt, who I've known since we were both 24 years old and working for the same firm in Charlotte. Walt retired from law 6 years ago after 30 years as a civil litigation attorney. He is the kind of man who is almost never surprised and almost always useful. I called him the morning after that dinner and told him the situation from the beginning. He listened without interrupting. Walt has always been good at that. When I finished, he said, "How much have you documented?" "Not enough yet," I said. "Start now," he said. "Everything. Dates, conversations, anything in writing. And check whether they've established any legal residency claim in your property. In North Carolina, that threshold is shorter than most people think." I didn't sleep well that night, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the particular alertness I get when a problem has finally clarified itself. I knew what I was dealing with now. A man who had been slowly, patiently testing the limits of what I would allow, and a plan that required me to either comply or be made to feel like the villain for refusing. I opened a new document on my laptop and started writing things down. He didn't wait long after that dinner to push further. A week later, he knocked on the door of my study and came in without being invited, which was itself a kind of statement. He sat down across from my desk like we were in his office and said that his parents had found a 1-bedroom in Wilmington they could afford, but that he was worried about his father's mobility and thought it would be better if they came here instead. We'd covered their portion of utilities, he said. "This isn't a rental property," I said. "It's a family home," he said. "Family takes care of family." I've heard that line used to justify all kinds of things. It usually means you give, we take, and if you don't, we'll make you feel like a bad person. "I haven't agreed to anything," I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, very calmly, "You should think about what kind of relationship you want to have with your daughter going forward." I looked back at him just as calmly. "I think about my relationship with my daughter every single day," I said. "You can go now." He left, but I noticed he didn't close the study door the way someone does when they're sorry. He left it open, another small act of possession. That night, I sent Walt a message with the new details. He called me back in 20 minutes. "He just made a threat," Walt said. "I know," I said. "Good. Write it down. Exact words. Exact time." I wrote it down. July 4th weekend, they invited his parents to visit. Nobody asked me. I came downstairs Saturday morning to find 4 additional people in my kitchen. His parents, a younger brother I'd never heard mentioned, and the brother's girlfriend, all using my appliances and occupying my space like they'd been briefed on where everything was. His mother was making eggs on my stove. His father was reading my newspaper, the actual paper copy I have delivered, folded open on my kitchen table. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and understood that this was not a visit. This was a preview. I made my coffee, took it to my back porch, and watched the Cardinals. I thought about my wife and what she would have said. She had been a quiet woman, but she had a particular clarity about people who took advantage of kindness. She would have seen this coming before any of them made a single move. I missed her with the specific ache that doesn't go away, just becomes part of the furniture of your chest. Then I went inside and made some decisions. Walt had been advising me in general terms as a friend, but I asked him formally if he'd take me on as a client. He said he would. Over the following 2 weeks, we prepared a formal notice of revocation of guest status for the current residents, meaning my daughter and her husband, to be served if necessary, in compliance with North Carolina's requirements for removing guests who may have established a claim of tenancy. We also drafted documentation of every conversation, incident, and exchange I had recorded since March. I told no one. It was not a comfortable time. He had become more confident, as entitled people do when they think the outcome is already decided. He started leaving his parents' contact information on my kitchen counter, apartment listings highlighted, figures circled, a kind of visual pressure campaign. My daughter was quieter with me. I don't know what he was telling her privately, but I know she stopped meeting my eyes the way she used to. I want to be honest about that part, because it was the hardest part. Not the legal preparation, not the inconvenience of having strangers use my home. The hardest part was watching my daughter choose a side that wasn't mine, and understanding that she had been choosing it slowly for months without fully realizing she was doing it. The dinner in August was when it broke open. He had invited his parents over again. Same pattern, no notice. And we were all sitting around my dining room table. He had been drinking. Not drunk, but loosened. He started talking about the future of the house, his parents' needs, the logistics of converting the downstairs room near the garage into a private suite, as if the plans had already been made and we were at the stage of working out details. I said, "No one has agreed to any of this." He put his glass down. His mother looked at the table. His father cleared his throat. "You're being selfish," he said. "You have more space than you need, and you're sitting on it while family struggles. What's wrong with you?" I looked at him. His face was red and certain, the face of someone who has been building to this moment for a long time. "This is my house," I said quietly. "I built this life. I paid for this house. My wife and I raised our daughter here. You do not get to sit at my table and call me selfish." He stood up. I don't know if he intended to reach for something or if it was instinct, but the glass in front of him went over, not dropped, pushed, and it hit the edge of the table and shattered on my hardwood floor. His mother said his name sharply. My daughter stood up. He pointed at me and said, "You need to figure out whose side you're on." I sat still. I said, "I'm on the side of what's legal and what's mine." He told me, and I want to record this exactly as he said it, "Old men who don't take care of their family end up alone. You should think about that." Then he walked out of my dining room, through my front door, and sat on my front porch. My daughter looked at me. Her eyes were wet. She said, "Dad, he didn't mean. He meant it." I said, "It's all right." Then I went upstairs to my study, closed the door, and sent Walt a single message. "We're ready." Walt had the paperwork prepared within 48 hours. A formal notice of termination of guest status was served to both my daughter and her husband, giving them 30 days to vacate the property in compliance with North Carolina law. The notice also documented the incident at dinner, the shattered glass, the verbal threats as supporting grounds. He called me 12 times in the first 2 hours after receiving the notice. I did not answer. On the 13th call, I answered and said, "Anything you need to communicate, please do it through Walt. Here is his number." Then I hung up. He showed up at Walt's office the next afternoon with a lawyer of his own, a young guy who looked like he'd gotten the referral from a Google search. They wanted to argue that the length of residency gave him and my daughter some form of tenant rights that complicated the eviction process. Walt had anticipated this. He had the documentation of my continuous objection to the arrangement, my records of every conversation in which I had declined or not consented, and the specifics of North Carolina law regarding the distinction between guests and tenants. The conversation ended in under an hour. What we hadn't anticipated, and what Walt discovered through a colleague 3 days later, was something more significant. His medical equipment sales business had been operating in a way that attracted the attention of the North Carolina Secretary of State's office. I won't claim I knew the details of it. I didn't, not at first. But Walt's colleague, who had a contact at a state agency, quietly confirmed that there was an ongoing review of several small medical supply companies in the region for issues related to billing irregularities and fraudulent insurance claims. His company was among them. I sat with that information for 24 hours. Then I called Walt and said, "Do we have an obligation to report what we know?" Walt said, "You have documentation of financial threats made in your home and statements about business arrangements. A forensic accountant who sits on that information when it's relevant to an ongoing investigation is in an uncomfortable position." I knew that already. I just needed to hear it said out loud. I submitted a voluntary statement to the state agency's intake office. I included the documentation of conversations in which he had referenced his business, the income he claimed, and specific figures he had mentioned in the context of trying to pressure me financially. I don't know exactly what weight it carried. I know that within 6 weeks of my submission, his business was placed under formal review. His personal bank accounts were frozen as part of that process. The 30-day notice ran out on a Tuesday in September. They were gone by Sunday. My daughter didn't speak to me for 2 months. That was the part I had prepared for in my head, but could not fully prepare for in my heart. I went through October alone in a way that felt different from all the other alone Octobers I'd had since her mother passed. This one had a different quality. Not grief exactly, but something like it. The particular silence of a house that had once held your child. I didn't reach out first. Walt had advised against it, and my own instincts agreed. I wrote her a letter instead, not an email, a letter on paper, in my actual handwriting, and I left it at her new address, which she had sent me through a mutual family friend. I told her that I loved her and that nothing about what happened changed that. I told her I understood if she needed time. I told her that when she was ready to talk, I would be there, and that I would not bring him up unless she did. She called me on a Thursday evening in November, 6 weeks after the letter. She was crying when I picked up. I just listened for a while. She told me that by September, before they had even finished moving out of my house, she had learned that his business accounts had been frozen and that the investigation had expanded. She told me she hadn't known. And I believed her because I knew my daughter and I knew the difference between someone who had been complicit and someone who had been deceived. She told me she had gotten a consultation with a family law attorney of her own. She said, "I should have seen it, Dad." I said he was good at making sure people didn't. His parents had emptied what savings they had trying to help him hire a proper defense attorney. They were now, as far as I understood, staying with the younger brother in a place that was too small for 4 people. I didn't feel satisfaction about that exactly. I felt something more like the flat acknowledgement of a sequence that had played itself out to its logical end. In February, she filed for divorce. I drove to Charlotte the weekend after she filed, and we had dinner at a restaurant we used to go to when she was in college. A quiet Italian place that still had the same booths and the same checkered tablecloths. We didn't talk about her much. We talked about her mother, which we hadn't done in a while. We talked about the summer she was 12, and we drove to the Outer Banks and the car broke down in Williamston, and we spent an unplanned night in a motel that had a pool shaped like a star. She had thought that was the best part of the whole trip. The accident of it, the way it turned into a memory all by itself. I drove home that Sunday with the windows down, even though it was still cold. I thought about what it means to protect something, not just property, not just legal rights, but the whole long accumulation of a life. The things you built slowly and carefully and intend to leave to someone who will understand their value. Walt called me the following Monday to give me a final legal update, Everything had resolved. No counterclaims, no further action, no complications. Clean, he said. Clean, I agreed. I had the hardwood floor in the dining room refinished that spring. They did beautiful work. You can't see where the glass broke anymore. Some evenings, I sit at that table alone with a cup of coffee, and I can almost hear the house settle back into itself. The particular quiet of a place that knows it belongs to someone who fought for it. The cardinals still come to the feeder every morning. I put fresh seed out on Sundays. My daughter calls me every Thursday night now. Last week she told me she'd been promoted. She sounded like herself again. Steadier, settled, the way she had sounded when she called me about him for the very first time, before everything. Maybe steadier than that. I told her I was proud of her. She said, "I know, Dad. That's enough. That has always been enough." I've thought a lot about what this whole thing actually cost me and what it gave back. The house is still standing. The cardinals still come on Sunday mornings. My daughter calls every Thursday. Those are the facts. But the part I keep turning over isn't the legal outcome. It's what the process asked of me, and whether I gave the right answers when it counted. There's a version of this story where I lose. Not in court, not on paper, but in the ways that are harder to measure. Where I let anger make my decisions. Where I became as hard and closed as the people I was protecting myself from. Where winning the house meant losing something quieter and more important. I was aware of that possibility the entire time. Every time I sat in my study adding dates and exact words to that document, I had to ask myself whether I was being careful or whether I was being cold. There's a difference, and the line between them is easy to cross without noticing. What kept me on the right side of it, I think, was that I never stopped asking whether what I was doing was actually right. Not just legal, not just strategic, but right. That question is the only one that can't be outsourced to an attorney or settled by a court ruling. You have to answer it yourself, every step of the way. That's what I mean when I talk about having a conscience that functions even when nobody's watching. It doesn't announce itself. It just keeps showing up, asking the same uncomfortable question, and insisting on an honest answer. The intelligence piece. And I don't mean book intelligence. I mean the kind that comes from paying attention over a long period of time. That's what let me see what was actually happening before it reached a point I couldn't recover from. 31 years of forensic accounting trained me to look at a pattern of small things and understand what they add up to. The recliner, the rearranged furniture, the casual mentions of his parents, each one was nothing. Together they were a strategy. Most people get hurt not because they missed the explosion, but because they kept dismissing the small signals that led to it. Clear thinking, patient observation, the discipline to write things down instead of just reacting, those tools matter as much in a family dispute as they do in a courtroom. And then there's the part that doesn't get talked about enough, which is the endurance required to hold a position when everyone around you is applying pressure to abandon it. 2 months without speaking to my daughter. The phone calls I didn't answer. The nights that October when the house felt genuinely empty in a way it hadn't since her mother died. None of that was easy. It would have been easier in the short term to give an inch, to delay the confrontation, to tell myself I'd deal with it later. But I knew, the way you know things you've learned the hard way, that later never comes on your terms. You either hold the line when it costs something, or you lose it when it costs everything. My daughter is doing well now. She is building a life that is actually hers. I think she is stronger for having gone through it, even though I would never have chosen it for her. The house belongs to me. The relationship belongs to both of us. That's the outcome I was protecting all along.